So we have our final presentation for today, and it's repositioning KMart, this time with feeling. And the presenters are Ken Roberts from Forethought Research, Rohan Raghavan from Forethought Research, John Roberts from University of New South Wales and London Business School, and Pete Danaher from Monash University. Please come on.
Thank you very much, and let me say how delighted we are to be here today. Thank you for coming to listen to us. Today I want to talk to you about KMart and the turnaround that it executed in Australia. My co-authors are Ken Roberts, who is the CEO of Forethought Research, the organisation which designed the feeling scale that we're going to be using in this piece of research, and Peter Danaher, who did all of both the individual level modelling of the market research data and the econometric modelling of the aggregate level data to measure advertising effectiveness. I'd like to start off by giving you a little bit of background about Kmart in Australia. The discount department store market in Australia is about $9 billion. It's a big industry, dominated by two players who own over 70% of the market. There's Big W and there's Kmart, and the next biggest player only owns 7%, a company called The Reject Shop. So these two big giants are basically duking it out. At the time, Kmart was doing reasonably well, in the sense that it had good store sales, they were stable, and everything was drifting along nicely in some senses of the word. But to quote Guy Russo, the CEO, it hadn't made a profit for 10 years, and its sales were pretty stagnant. So it had been inherited by a new parent who was sick of not making any money and decided that things had to change. So that's the situation which we enter. The business challenge really was how to change this organisation and how to actually get some business in the store. So the store, the chain had 190 stores. It was selling 2.3 million customers every week, which is about 10% of Australia's population. The average basket size was about $30, which consisted of about 4 items. Inter-purchase times were about every 8 weeks, and every week they were selling about 500 million items. So a fairly big store, but stagnant store, tired, no money, no profits, no return to shareholders, and therefore not satisfactory. The CEO of Wesfarmers, the parent, told Guy Russo, the CEO of Kmart, that he wanted to see some change, and they decided to move to everyday low pricing and cut their prices by 30%. That was a fairly dramatic change. And to be able to cut your prices by 30%, clearly to make up that revenue, you're going to have to dramatically increase store traffic. So this is what...
Kmart had simply lost its way. All great retailers know who they are, they know their customer base, and they know their product offer. But Kmart had lost track. We were trying to be all things to all people. We were a discount department store masquerading as a mid-tier retailer. The sales line was strong and we were still serving over 2 million customers a week, but we hadn't made any money in the last 10 years. This downward, long-term profit trend forced the hand of the new owners, and the question was asked, should we close the business?
So in reaction to that, the CEO, Guy Russo, and Diane Workman, who we just saw there, the Chief Marketing Officer. Diane Workman was a veteran of the industry. He'd been the Chief Marketing Officer at Coca-Cola South Pacific. He'd been the Chief Marketing Officer at McDonald's. McDonald's decided to dramatically re-engineer the business. Some of the things they did were they totally pruned the product range. They moved from 0.99 price points to dollar price points. They removed all of the dump bins to make the stores look more attractive. They totally cleaned up the stores. And more dramatically, perhaps, something that got JCPenney into trouble in this country, they transitioned to everyday low pricing, and they dropped their prices by an average of 30%. In some senses, to listen to Diane Walkman, the CMO again, in some senses this made for quite an exciting time in Kmart's history, but it had to be compensated by dramatically increasing sales to maintain revenue. And this is what happened, in his words. We had the new stores. They looked dramatic. They looked clean, clear cut, no clutter, and the perceptions of the stores were still that they're the old stores. And in Dion Workman's words, here was the challenge that Kmart faced.
Our renewal stage was really exciting. We were making dramatic change to a business that was one step from closing. Nothing was sacred. We'd made all the physical changes to the business first. We cleaned the stores, moved to EDLP, expanded our sourcing business in Asia and retrained our store managers. And then we kicked open the doors of our new improved business and waited. And waited. And waited. And nothing really changed. We were still serving the same amount of customers. It was heartbreaking. It became obvious that despite the comprehensive changes, customers did not see a dramatically different Kmart.
So the challenge that was now facing Kmart is they're now walking the walk. They've now totally re-engineered the business, but there's a dramatic need for changing perceptions. There's a dramatic need for actually getting this news to the customer and seeing whether they could get the customer, the target market, to value this. Peter Danaher is going to actually take us through the modelling and marketing science approach that we use to try and help management address this issue.
Thank you, John, and good morning, everyone. As John mentioned, I'm going to talk about the modelling that we did here, and I'm going to start with a conceptual model. And the left-hand side of this should be familiar to most of you already, which is that value is driven by quality and price, and in turn, quality is driven by performance and reputation. But the new element for us here is what you see on the right-hand side, which is emotions. We're going to incorporate emotions at the same level in this hierarchy as value, and I'll explain how that comes along shortly. So that's what we're doing conceptually. This is what we're going to do mathematically. The outcome here for us is choice of store. So when you see LC on the left-hand side, the dependent variable, that is likelihood to choose one of the stores. A number of online surveys were run here. John mentioned we've got Kmart as our chief store here. Their competitor is Big W. They also have Target in this market, and so people were queried about at least two of those stores. So we have 2 observations per person, and that enables us to have a measure of heterogeneity with our random effect here for each person, and the intercept is possible because we have 2 observations per person. We've also had dummy variables for Kmart and Big W, and in line with our conceptual model we have value here, and then the 9 emotions ranging from surprise through to shame all come in here in the top level model. Underneath it, the next layers are our model for value, which is a function of quality and price, as I mentioned earlier, and then in turn quality is a function of performance and reputation. There are 3 other models here, but I won't go into those in much detail. At this point, we need to put it all together. Now, many people who've worked in this area before have done their value model separate from their performance models and that sort of thing. We're going to do them all together simultaneously. So I've defined a vector here which has got all 6 outcomes, and we've also got all 6 of these random effects intercepts, and they go into a multivariate normal model. This is fitted by Bayesian Markov chain Monte Carlo methods, you notice they're a covariance matrix, so we're allowing all those 6 equations to covary. So that basically means all our model was put together in one large package. I'll now transfer over to Ken.
Thank you, Peter. So here we have an organisation, as John's mentioned, that's having more than just a little bit of difficulty. And the new parent is in a no-talking mood, in fact. They're threatening to close the business down. In fact, they're now at the stage of deciding which Kmart stores will be rebranded, one of the other chain's labels, and shut a whole lot of them down. So they're at that sort of stage. So they're looking to us to develop these set of drivers that are going to dramatically improve their performance through their advertising. So the principal drivers are going to be critical. We've developed, as we'll see, we'll develop a model that is highly explanatory in terms of predicting change in market share, but will the organisation then take those drivers and actually communicate them? And will the communication be effective? So there's a whole lot of steps along the way that we're going to talk about. The first that we're going to talk about is the difficulty we've got with the emotion and understanding how we can actually develop a scale that's going to actually capture emotion. I'm sure that you're all aware of the false sunrise of neuroscience and how it's been unable to help us with being able to get a measure of discrete emotions. And of course, the advertising industry are wanting discrete emotions in their communication strategy. So we're clearly in the need of doing something new. So let's just recall perhaps the work of Damasio. Antonio Damasio in 1999, in his seminal book, A Feeling of Happening, talks about this process of the way our brain works. And he begins by helping us to understand that we have a state of emotion and that we have this constant assessment of all of the stimulus going on around us, and is going through this one sort of processor, if you like, and most of the items that are going through this processor are simply just going straight through and nothing's happening. But a small fraction of them, maybe 2% according to Damasio, actually get elevated. They get elevated to a state of a feeling. And a feeling is an emotion coloured in by memory. So as these emotions become feelings, some of them, a very small number of them, then become a state of feeling made conscious. And you're aware of these feelings. So you might have experienced someone stepping out in front of your car, suddenly moving the car, pulling over, feeling this high level of anxiety, rushing through your blood. And that is a feeling, that is an emotion that has become a feeling that you've become aware of. But as I said before, Damasio tells us that only 2% of those come across. So the problem that we've got is that once you have a feeling, of course, it becomes private. You might decide to share it or not share it, and there might be a whole lot of social bias about you actually being frank and honest about what feelings you're experiencing. So we need to have a methodology that's going to enable us to get the feelings precognitively. And that's the key point, precognitively. So we have developed a methodology and indeed a scale which is called prophecy feelings, which we believe is precognitive. And in fact, it is precognitive. We'll show you the evidence of that. So here is a scale. It's like Second Life. You come in and it's engaging. You decide what gender you are. Well, you don't decide what gender you are. You choose your gender. Then you choose your ethnicity. And then you're confronted with these metaphors that are based on avatars. So the avatars have built within them these metaphors, and we move the metaphors to show how we feel. So this is apparently, from first glance, looks like a very trivial exercise, but in fact it's getting a precognitive assessment of a stimulus. We do this in two rounds. First of all, we find out how people are feeling before they see any stimulus. Then we give them some stimulus and they go through that exercise. There's 9 emotions, and the abandonment rate during this part of the survey is nil. The engagement of this kind of work is incredible, and it's entirely ubiquitous. We've done them in TV cinemas, movie cinemas. We've done them in shopping aisles, on smartphones, and it's getting a true sense of how people are feeling. So what this is going to enable us to do is understand what the drivers are, the emotional drivers for the discount department store, in order to drive traffic. So one of the things that you might be interested in noticing is the latency of the various scales. So the first one that I wanted to show you is just the standard latency of the thought scale, so the cognitive scales. And then I want to overlay on that the feeling scale. So what you'll notice is through that millisecond on the x-axis is that we've got a medium and a mode less than a second. In fact, we've got about 50 or 60% of feelings are done under a second in terms of the scale, whereas a normal cognitive scale, we've got usually only about 1 in 10 respondents have actually got to that point. So we show this as evidence of what is called an implicit scale. So I'd like to then call on Peter to just talk to us about the construct validity.
Thank you, Ken. as with all measurement systems, you want to be sure that what you're measuring is what you think you're getting, and this is no different here. And so what we did is we took a sample of 400 people and we showed them the different avatars and then asked them to basically check a box and said, which of these 9 emotions do you think recognize this as? And we gave them a couple of other options, one of which was an other emotion and another one which was none of these emotions. And what you see here in this matrix is a factor analysis which relates the 9 emotions down the left-hand side to the latent factors. And just to highlight a couple of things here, you can see on the diagonal the loadings here, the highest number is 1 that you can possibly get. These numbers are all very close to 1, which gives us some a nice feeling of validity on that, of just convergent validity. And on the off diagonal, we see numbers all very close to 0, which gives us some confidence we've got some discriminant validity. So we see here demonstrated that we are probably capturing the emotions we think we're capturing with the scale.
So now we're going to look at the actual baseline performance. We're going to look at both the cognitive performance and drivers and the emotional drivers. And we're going to then make a recommendation to the creative agency and to the client for developing creative on the basis of these drivers. So first of all, we see the total overview of the model. And what we're seeing is that the very top line there, the grey text at the very top, is saying thoughts 75%, feelings 25%. So whilst the major drivers are price and operational performance and reputation, feelings are still accounting for about 25%. Now, Damasio and Kahneman tell us that you cannot make a decision without an emotion, that the emotion is the catalyst. So whilst it's 25%, it's still the primary driver. So our first, from the cognitive perspective, is just to have a look at this matrix here, and we're looking at the most important driver. It's the one, the highest there, a store I feel comfortable in. And that's the most important cognitive driver. And you might think that that's about ambient comfort, but it's not. It's about the discount department store shopper, the mum, who feels comfortable that she's living within her means. And that's the primary driver of the cognitive driver. And so now what I want to do is introduce you to the emotion, but I'm going to need to display the scale to you and build a picture. So first of all, on the extremities we have the emotions. So on the right-hand side, happiness, love, pride, contentment. Then on the left-hand side, we have the negative emotions, shame, anxiety, sadness and anger. And then in the very top up there, we've got surprise. Surprise, depending on the coefficient, can either be negative or positive. And in this case, it was positive. Then we've just built the relative importance with the beta coefficients to see which are the most important drivers. And you'll see that maroon one, pride, is a pretty important driver. And it turns out that it's pride that the creative agency decides to go with in terms of its communication strategy. So what I've just added is a red line in the middle, and the red line in the middle is the calibration point. And now I'm adding the brands. First of all, KMart, and now Big W. And what you notice is a rather distressing finding. I'm going to show you some other findings a little bit later are nothing like this. But these two are absolutely, well, just about perfect substitutes emotionally. There's almost no differentiation, and this exactly mimics the kind of competitive behaviour that you see, where they just absolutely replicate each other every week. Same ads, same catalogues, same store designs, and so on. It's a duopoly. So now we've got our emotion, pride, and we've also got our cognitive driver. So that's translating to a unifying brand emotion around pride and a reason to believe around living within my means. And so now what we've got to do is convince the creative agency that this is what they should be using. But what I want to ask first, I want to ask Dion Workman to tell us about what value did he see out of us delivering this modelling outcome.
Confidence, really. We have a big business. We run 75,000 SKUs covering both apparel and general merchandise. So our creative choices are endless. The 4-foot model helped us understand with a great deal of clarity what specifically we needed to focus on. It stopped us drifting off course. It kept us focused on the importance of communicating low prices and not to be seduced into an emotional proposition so common with fashion and lifestyle products. But emotion does play a role, and the model told us which emotional drivers to focus on.
So now the key point about the translation to the creative. And I'm certain that every person in this room has had the same experience where they've developed great marketing insight, only to hand it to the creative agencies and see it dissipated into some sort of direction that you get back the advertising and it bears no resemblance whatsoever to the insight. So there was an enormous amount of effort gone into here to ensure that the creative agency was aligned to understanding about pride. And we're dealing with a creative agency here that isn't going to know a whole lot about the psychology of pride. So there was an education process required. So we began with this trilogy, the creative, the client and the marketing researcher. And we went into this pre-workshop. The first thing we did is we gave them a whole lot of homework where they had to read about the academic constructs, the psychological constructs of pride, and the two primary constructs, group membership, which generates pride, group membership, I'm proud to be a member of this group, and achievement pride, and helping them to understand that they're the two sources of pride, and then moving through this process and enabling them to come to the end and to draft content, which was basically a creative brief.
The research provided BWM and Kmart with the certainty to go with the big idea, and as it turned out, it accurately predicted consumer behaviour in market as well. I think the forethought research allowed client, agency and researcher to all stand back and view the strategy, idea and execution objectively.
That was Jamie Mackay. He's Head of Strategic Planning. You probably picked up he's from the creative agency. So now comes the creative execution. And the way that they came up with quite ingeniously was interpreting the issue of group membership of the idea of 1,000 mums. So they literally recruited 1,000 mums. There is no talent in this ad. It's all 100% real mums who come to a store. I'll let the ad do the talking.
On July 11, Kmart invited 1,000 mums to a store with no price tags. This is what happened.
Boyfriend days. No less than 75. Oh, should be 45. Wow. Half of what I thought. This one. Come on, just try them on. No, look. Yeah, they're nice. I reckon they're 32. Yeah, I reckon. No.
When you realise just how dramatically low they've dropped their prices, gee, it feels good. So would you like irresistibly low prices on everything, every day?
Now, in a market that's used to only doing catalogues, Big W have to scurry to get a creative out. So they've said T-shirts, we'll say T-shirts. They've said $4, we'll say $5. They've done sandwich makers, we'll do toasters. We'll absolutely replicate that creative, and indeed, they've got this the creative you're about to see out in just 10 days. But what they miss is the underlying emotion. What they do is they replicate the cognitive.
Guess what? What? You get it for less. You get it for less.
You do the addition.
There's no competition. You get it for less.
You get it for less.
And here I will stress.
It isn't funny
to run out of money. So get it for less.
Get it for less.
Yes. Yes.
Get it for less. Living for less.
So the response on the emotional scale. So on the left-hand side, remember you've got the brand there in the type the dark maroon. That's the Kmart brand. The black is the ad. You can see that the black has activated a whole lot of positive emotions. It's activated the target emotion of pride, and it's also activated surprise. Surprise is a critical emotion if you want to stimulate a learning. It leads to cognitive curiosity. And so if you've got a message like low prices, you want to create surprise. What you see on the other side, the right-hand side, is Woolworths. And what you see is that creative has stimulated anger. And it's moving the brand in precisely the wrong way.
The launch of 1,000 Mums was a turning point in the economic history of Kmart Australia.
So now the business outcomes. So we're Kmart, so we're purple. So let's have a look at our performance in 2011 prior to the campaign. So you can see that Woolworths is soundly beating us on the primary drivers that we've chosen. Always low prices and a store I feel comfortable in. 12 months later, we've taken a supreme lead in both the primary operational driver, the quality driver, a store I feel comfortable in, and the most important driver, always low prices. And what about the emotions? Well, we already had a slender lead against Woolworths on pride, but a major deficit on love. 12 months later, we've turned the deficit around in love to a positive, and indeed Big W now have the negative, and not surprisingly after running that ad for all of that period. So we've turned that around in just 12 months. Now we move to the next one, and this is the final ad that I wanted to show you. There's a change of strategy after 18 months. So we're going to see some results over a couple of years. So I wanted to actually show you the last bit of creative. This was based on qualitative research as well. The finding here was that we needed to show more of the product, because there was a question, yes, the products are cheap, but are they reliable? And also, we wanted to see the product out of home. But again, it's about pride. So here we are.
I'm the cat with the bass and drum, going around like bum bum bum. What's grooving? I'm moving. I like your style of lumping. How charming, just a rapper. Load him up and eat that snapper. I'm so cool and I'm so groovy. When I go bum bum bum. I'm so cool and I'm so groovy. When I go bum bum bum.
So you've now got pretty good comprehension in this exhibit, and what you can see is we've started to get a real cumulative effect. We've got the original mauve line in the middle of the brand, we've got the dotted line for 1,000 mums, and then we've got Bom Bom. And the great thing about Bom Bom is you have a look at the bottom emotion of contentment, it's starting to drive contentment, and contentment is important for retention. Content customers don't move. So now you've built the traffic, you want to keep the traffic. So building contentment is critical. So now I'd like to turn over to Peter Danaher to tell us a little bit about the advertising effectiveness. Peter.
Thank you again, Ken. I feel like I've done this a few times before with you. One of the dreams we have in marketing science is to relate sales, or in our case store visits, to advertising. And any of us who've tried to do this will know this is a bit of a challenge. You know, it seems conceptually like you should be able to do it, but it's actually quite hard to do in practice. I'm going to show you what we did here. A number of things come up we have to worry about in models. I've done this before in packaged goods, and here there are 4 items I'm looking at here. You've got aggregation bias, you've got serial correlation, you've got endogeneity effects of, in our case, store visits and advertising, and carryover effects. I'm going to put together a model that takes care of all of those four challenges. Take note, first of all, our dependent variable here is store visits. We're not using sales because, of course, the price is going down, so dollar sales you might expect is going down too, because prices went down by 30%, as we mentioned earlier. And so we've got store visits. I don't have to explain that. That's a pretty easy one. Advertising, I'll elaborate on that a little bit shortly. And a bunch of control variables here, because there are stock take sales in the middle part of the year, and there's Christmas and New Year sales as well. So essentially what we care about is the coefficient for advertising. But I'm going to elaborate on this a little bit, because as we saw before, there are 2 ads at play here. The first is 1,000 mums. The second is the Bom Bom campaign. So what I'm going to do is have separate dummy variables for each of those 2 campaigns to see if we can tease out the separate effects. Like, is there a premium in advertising effectiveness for 1,000 mums and also for Bom Bom? So just take a note of that and see how this works out in our results. Data very briefly, about 4 years worth of data we have here, done in 4 weekly periods, and we have a number of items sold, which you can work out the average dollar amount. The 1,000 mums is a television campaign, obviously, and but we also have information on their advertising for newspapers and magazines and radio and the internet. How can I forget? And we also want to worry about what Big W is doing, the competitor. So we've got competitive advertising information. So having a look at how this works over time, what we see here is I've taken the log of store visits here, and you can see the influence of the 1,000 mums. See, it took a little while to get going, but you see a massive spike in store visits just shortly after 1,000 mums, And I'd love to be able to say that was due to the advertising, but actually you see 3 big spikes in this graph, and they're all due to the Christmas New Year period. But you do also notice, well, I noticed this, is a slight upward trend here, as if you take out the 3 large spikes. So we can start to see a slight upward trend in store visits. So our job here is to look at advertising, is we need to take care of the obvious seasonal effects that's going on around Christmas, New Year, and take care of the lowering prices, and then is there anything left for advertising to explain? And there is. Here's the first one. I'm just going to highlight the advertising elements in this model. The elasticity here, remember this is a log-log model, so the beta coefficients are elasticities, and the elasticity for Kmart advertising, regardless of Bomb Bomb and 1,000 Mums, is positive and significant. We then look at 1,000 Mums by itself. Does it add a premium like I mentioned before? And yes, the answer it does. In fact, the elasticity increases by about 50%. And Bomb Bomb, as you saw with the emotions web that Ken just presented, Bomb Bomb also has a premium on top of it. So the 2 campaigns actually enhanced advertising effectiveness over and above what we would normally see for Kmart's television advertising. I'll stop here and back to Ken.
Thank you. Transportability. So this has been, this is the first time that we've ever publicly shown any of these results, in particular the latency and also the construct validity. But this methodology has been applied now for the last couple of years since we launched it. There's some of the brands that are applying it. There's some of the North American brands that are applying it at present. And a couple of interesting findings for you, perhaps. This is a continuum of how important are feelings versus thoughts. So on the far right-hand side, prepaid cell phones is only a 5% feelings. On the right over across here is pharmaceutical, or is diapers, in fact, for Kimberly-Clark, for first-time mums, and it's a highly emotional decision. So we can see that it varies dramatically by category, and even within category it varies by segment. A couple of examples. This is ExxonMobil looking at the effect of the Mexico disaster on the Deepwater Horizon. On the left-hand side is before the Deepwater Horizon, and you can see the inner circle is 46% is negative. If you go to the right, it's vastly more negative. And if you have a look at the anger, which is the red, it dramatically increases from anger at 15% to 22%. So consumers become more angry to the category. And then we look at the actual performance. The green one on the far right-hand side, right over in anger, is BP. So, and by the way, all of the advertising that we're cleaning up the Gulf is actually reminding people that they should be angry, not having any effect on lowering that anger. And now this is, I thought you might like to see Bud. This is Bud Light. You can see Bud Light has an unbelievably powerful brand. It's the brand right across on the right. It's got a very major spike on happiness. I know that you understand that beer makes you smart, but I don't know if you realise that beer makes you happy. And this is their last Super Bowl ad. And what you can see with the black line is that it succeeded on matching the brand on happiness and on surprise, but it did not on contentment or love. And the actual ad was about someone losing their job and getting a redundancy, and in return for the redundancy, getting a case of Bud Light. It was funny, but emotionally it was disconcerting and lowering contentment. So with that, I'd like to hand over to John Roberts.
Okay, I'd like to quickly summarise what we've done. I think, firstly, from the perspective of Kmart, from the client's perspective, I think we demonstrated them very clearly that walking the walk was fine, getting the operational performance was fine, but in fact, unless they could take the consumer along with them in terms of their perceptions and feelings, they weren't going to succeed. And in particular, the feelings, we showed to Kmart that the feelings in this category could be measured and managed, and in fact, that these feelings that once measured could actually be workshopped into creative advertising. So the market research was actually integrated into the stimulus design and then tested. And this adaptive circle or cycle of marketing research, insight, action, feedback from the marketplace, new insight, was in fact extremely useful for Kmart. To give you some feeling for the short-term and long-term advantages of this, we can see the short-term advantages was a growth in foot traffic of about 20%, a growth in items per basket of about 17%, which taken together led to about 40% more items sold. Given the effective price change with everyday low pricing of 24%, that more than offset the increased items, more than offset the price decrease, leading to a 6.6% increase in sales dollars. But most dramatically was an increase in earnings before interest and tax of about 69%, which compared to its major competitors' increase over the 2-year period of only 7.9%. That's a short-term performance. If we look at the long-term performance in terms of the brand equity, Kevin Keller suggests that brand equity is the differential effect that brand knowledge has on the marketing of a product. So we look at the brand knowledge in terms of the rational drivers, and we can see in terms of the rational drivers, a store I feel comfortable with, the maroon bars still, has increased dramatically, and we can see in terms of the emotional drivers and love and pride has also increased. So we've got stronger momentum, stronger brand equity, stronger short-term performance, and this led to some extent Kmart becoming the darling of the financial markets. Guy Russo, you can see in the Herald Sun, one of the major newspapers, was seen as being highly successful. Wesfarmers, the parent, was extremely pleased with them. Richard Goyder, the CEO of Wesfarmers, in the following clip in ABC, Australia's top, like the UK BBC, in an interview with the ABC, said this about what he thought about the performance at Kmart.
The Kmart performance was a terrific performance, and that's on the back of strong improvement over the last few years in that business, and it's a credit to Guy Russo and Ian Bailey and the team at Kmart. And what I guess the lesson for any retailer or what Kmart's doing is that the offer is resonating with our customers. We've got more customers in stores buying more products, and that's been the case, I think, for 10 quarters now in Kmart.
And so, from a business perspective, Kmart is actually pretty pleased with Forethought Research and BWM, their agency. From an academic perspective, I think it's quite interesting that we've actually decided that we can capture emotions in a very different way to how they've been captured before. We can discriminate between these different emotions, seen by the factor analysis. We've shown nomenological and convergent validity as well, and also that those emotions do influence evaluation and choice, and therefore they offer both explanatory power, forecasting, and prognosis, management direction. And the nice little bit at the end, I guess, was the bit where we suggested that we can econometrically actually, at a macro level, work out the effect of those different campaigns. So that pretty much finishes us, and I'd just like to say thank you very much for your attention.
Let me begin by saying wonderful presentation, and clearly you've done wonderful work with Kmart. Now for the hard questions. Wesfarmers owns both Kmart and Target, correct? And that last slide you showed, Target was down 44%, where Kmart's up. So why aren't they using your system for both? If the primary driver is understanding the emotions and getting the creative correct for driving traffic.
Yeah, why don't you, John?
So that's a very good question, and it just so happens the next overhead says cannibalisation of Target ? So if we think about it, Kmart and Target, as you point out, are both owned by Wesfarmers. And during Kmart's ascendancy, Target did suffer a major decline in its market share. And the question is, could there be some cannibalisation? Now, you also said, would this, we'll come back to whether... Okay, so the methodology?
I'm really concerned, why is it that you can be successful with one, they go, this is the reason, yet they don't say, well, Target should be doing the same thing. It's dying.
So there are two quick answers. The first quick answer is this is a business which manages SBUs independently. If we look at IBIS, who's the major reporter of business performance, they don't include Target in the discount department store market. But why doesn't Target use this? Because they get some insight from it. Ken can actually tell us why that's the case.
Yeah, I think that, Tim, thank you. That's a very obvious question. And we would have, it absolutely kills us to actually keep on doing these results and keep on looking at the sister business getting deeper and deeper into trouble. And the speculation about which one's going to be closed, it's gone from Kmart was going to be closed, it's now a discussion that the Target's going to be closed. The simple answer is that they've approached us, but we're not allowed to work for them because the intensity of the competition between the business units is enormous.
Well, you've described that there have been quite a bit of changes, right, before you started with your project, like refitting the outlets, price reductions, the number of SKUs have been lowered without little effect, as we have seen. But how can we all be so sure that actually your approach is actually explaining the nice success later, the performance, and not maybe a delayed effect of all the major changes right before you got in?
There's two answers to that. There's Peter's answer. There's there's a downward sloping demand curve, so not surprisingly, demand went up. They were at a point of panic because they had done everything and nothing happened. They maintained volume, and they, as John so rightly points out, this is a penetration strategy, and there is no increase in sales. There's no increase in foot traffic at all. So there's been a period there where it's fairly stable. But Peter, you've got a technical answer to that.
Yeah, Manheim, I think you might have seen in that graph I displayed of store visits that I did point out a very slight upward trend even before the 1,000 Mums campaign came in. And I think that generally was the effect of what you mentioned earlier, but in particular EDLP, which we were able to gauge because we knew the average basket size and the number of transactions. But even when we peeled back those layers and dealt with that, there was still room to actually pick up the effect of advertising, and explicit to 1,000 Mums and Bomb Bomb. Now, as someone who's done a lot of these sort of studies before, I was astonished. In fact, I would like to be able to publish this as a textbook example of advertising effectiveness, because it really does conform well almost to what we'd hope you'd want to pick up here, which is just being able to discretize out the effect of a particular campaign over and above all the other effects that are going on there. So I think that I hear what you say. Was it delayed? But I mean, our data went back 4 years. I mean, waiting 2 years is a long time. It was 2 years before that we have our data, before the 1,000 Mums came along.
And I'd just like to add one further bit, and that is it's unusual. I can't ever remember having seen micro-level data which so strongly support this, that evaluations and choice are driven by thoughts and feelings. We've changed thoughts and feelings, and the market research says that intent is going to change. We see it change in the marketplace. So all of the micro-level data suggests that we've changed all of the drivers of behaviour, and we see the behaviour change. Now, it still might be due to price, but then we see the macro-level data as well, and that combination of micro-evidence and macro-evidence is pretty unusual, I think, in marketing science.
Yeah, but this won't be my question, but I will say you had one advantage, and that is your main competitor was exactly like you in terms of your pre and post, and you had a nice ad that hit the emotions, and the other ad was awful. And so, you know, you had some things working in your favor to make that discrimination happen, in my opinion. You know,
I think it's
bad execution from your competitor is always a nice win.
Absolutely.
Where I have my most difficulty, and is I see a lot of advertising research in my business, and so there's a strong stress on the precognitive piece that you have, and I'm sure, and by the way, I know about the debates you have online and things like that, because I research this with people going, oh, come on, you know, you have to go do neuroscience to do that. Taking that out for just a second, I'm still having trouble understanding why I couldn't just put a set of emoticons on for the 8 emotions and get pretty much the same effect if I say just touch, 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 right? There seems to be some reason that I'm supposed to be moving left and right to get these emotions to help me do this in a precognitive way, and I don't understand it. Can you help me understand?
Sure. There's a whole lot of aspects, Tim, to the answer to that question. The first is, what are the primary emotions that are driving consumption behaviour? And the standard methodologies that are out there haven't actually identified in a statistical way what are the emotions that are actually driving consumption behaviour. So first, that's the first point. The second point is intensity of the emotion, intensity of the feeling. So the scale is enabling us to find out whether people are a little bit surprised or incredibly surprised. So the dynamic nature of the scale is really important. The lack of cognitive processing, in that there's no instructions. Unlike in other surveys where there's instructions about select a emoticon or whatever, this is an animated piece of work that runs for a couple of minutes where there is no instructions. People are just moving the mouse, and we know that the motor skills in their hands are not cognitively engaging. So we're very confident. And I think that those people that, like you and I, who took so much interest in neuroscience when it first came along, and you know, we went down that pathway as well, became incredibly disappointed because we found that the primary output was approach versus avoidance. And we all know that avoidance can be a really primary driver of behaviour. So you know, neuroscience coming back and saying, A, we cannot tell you what the discrete emotion is because there's no love or there's no happiness part of the brain. It's a neural network. But you know, Carnegie Mellon are doing some really impressive work trying to work out what the state is, what the linkage is between those neurons. But they can't deliver to us these discrete emotions. So having the discrete emotions, understanding how they link to consumption behaviour, having an intensity of those, all combine to give us this insight. And we're finding that it's incredibly predictive of change in market share. It's added substantially to our cognitive models.
Sorry.
Could I just add a bit to, and that is that sure we've got all of the data on mannequins and people have used mannequins. I think these are much finer than mannequins because they're continuous, they're not discrete. So I think this is a much more subtle form of elicitation. Secondly, I haven't seen, because I've read all the literature. I spent all my December and January reading all of the literature. I have seen nothing about the response latencies that's as powerful as that graph. When we came up with those graphs, I was just amazed about the difference between the response latencies for cognitions versus the response latencies for thought. So even if mannequins did elicit, I've seen no evidence that mannequins can actually elicit much more quickly such small response latencies. And the third thing is, if you do a Google or a Google Scholar on choice and emotions, you will come up with nothing, literally nothing. And so even if mannequins did do the same job as we did, and I personally don't believe they do, and they haven't provided the evidence with response latencies, nowhere have I seen emotions incorporated into choice models. They've been incorporated into evaluation models in places like JCR, but never into discrete choice models before.
Yes. The answer to that is obviously yes. But my real question ultimately becomes, all the big firms have something where they claim they're putting emotions in their advertising, right? Millward Brown, Ipsos, whatever, right? I'm wondering how I'm getting a different outcome from yours than I would get from them. Would they not come up with the same basic emotional driver and the same basic kind of here's what's driving success for the advertisement?
Can I, Gary, I hope this is not a little irregular, but I have one of my developers with us who's on our psych side. Can I get your opinion? Could you come up? You need to speak to the mic if you're going to speak. Johan Palampalan, Dr. Johan Palampalan.
Yeah, look, in the development work to develop the scale, we ran a cognitive scale parallel to the feeling scale using a matched samples design. What we found was that on the positive emotions, the cognitive scale performed comparably in terms of predictive power, but not well on the negative emotions. Okay? Cognitive scales underperformed in terms of how they predicted the outcome, and we explained that in terms of a social desirability effect going on, that people understate the intensity of their negative emotions. Because we're taking a measure of negative emotions implicitly, the scale is actually superior to the cognitive scale in the testing we've done for negative emotions.
I'd also like to say something else, and that is, I think it's, in some senses, we're putting this out there, we're being perfectly public about everything that's happened here. So to hold us to a benchmark of stuff that's just not available, or it's very hard for us to know what's being done because it's just not out there. I mean, we can find nothing out there, and we're prepared to put everything out there. We can find nothing out there that does the same kind of thing.
Yep. Okay, you have described the process of how to translate your insights from the emotions, cognitions, etc., into the ideation, into the development of a new TV campaign, right? I still have this kind of feeling of, can we be sure that the campaign that you developed actually is like the best one? Because we have here like a natural experiment, so there is no kind of benchmark. What would have happened if you had chosen maybe not pride, but maybe another dimension. So, and here we are talking about a lot of like optimization or improvement, etc. So how can we be sure that this is like perfect or close to perfect? Do you have any evidence on that?
Well, we do. It's an excellent question again. We do have evidence that anger is not going to help with the alternative. But we do have a large. We have thousands of ads that we've tested, and we've got thousands of correlations and that indicate to us that the right emotions. And the other thing is, it's intuitive. If I show you, the crisis in the Gulf, for example, and you see a spike in anger, then it's intuitive when you see the result from the testing as well. So it has really high face validity. That's why it's being adopted so quickly by the execs. They're finding the output really having high face validity.
And I think the short answer, it's not perfect. It's not as good as it could be. I think it's better than anything else we've got. But I'm sure it's not perfect. I'm sure as time goes by, Ken's company will get even better at this.
Okay. Right, thank you again.